Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this week's podcast, Serious Chat with a Comedian. Well, my guest really needs no introduction, but let me just tell you, is the lead guitarist of one of the most iconic rock bands in the world in the 80s and the 90s, and definitely one of the most amazing rock bands that ever to come out of Australia. Mr. Tim Farriss, thanks very much for joining us, mate.
My pleasure, Joe. Thanks for having me.
You're one of those guys that... like I've had guests on and I've got to kind of give them a lot of, 3 or 4 lines of what they've done. Mate, there's no big fancy introduction to you, mate, and that's not because you're not a big fancy guy.
I'm blushing. But you got to answer one question. Who's the comedian?
Yeah.
Me.
Well, mate, look, I don't want to harp on about the history of INXS because I think it's been covered enough, but I want to start back in the early years. In particular, one thing that fascinates me, I mean, it's amazing enough that one sibling is a great musician, but here you are with your 2 younger brothers, Andrew and John, and you're all great musicians. How did that come about? I mean, who picked up an instrument first? Who influenced who growing up? Tell us about that, mate.
Well, in all honesty, I picked up an instrument first because I was the older of the brothers. But our father sort of... we were always around music. Mum and Dad used to constantly have records playing, stuff like soul and, Sergio Mendes, Brazil 66, and Hootenanny, all kinds of Herb Alpert, all that sort of stuff. And, I used to love watching the Monkees television show. I used to run home from school to watch the Monkees.
Yeah.
But Dad made sure that we all sort of were starting to play an instrument by the time we were about 8 years old.
Oh, that's great.
And I funnily enough, my first guitar teacher, I have really fond memories of him back in Perth. A guy named, such fond memories, I forgot his name. Peter Federici, or Tony Federici.
Right.
His wife called him Peter, but his name was Tony, so I could never really figure that out.
Yeah.
And he was a lovely old Italian man, and he wrote music with beautiful fountain pen script, and the whole thing, and the way I had to sit, it was classical guitar and flamenco Spanish, so it was nothing like what I ended up playing.
Yeah.
But the whole thing was kind of trippy, and he would accompany me on mandolin or a trombone or guitar or bass, like some sort of classic bass thing, and it struck me straight away as a magical thing when 2 people played music together, rather than just by yourself. I always thought I sounded a bit shonky just by myself. We sort of took that home with. I sort of took that home with my brothers a bit too. And when Andrew started playing the piano, we'd sort of jam a bit here or there, and or my mother's brother, our uncle, would come over and he'd play piano. Dad would sort of play a bit of drums, and he taught Johnny how to play the basics on drums. So it was this kind of thing but we're all at that age where, 2 years between brothers is like a lot. It was a thing where we went off, I went off, and we moved from Perth to Sydney. That's where I met Kirk. And he and I started playing guitar together and never looked back. We'd still be playing guitar together today if it probably wasn't for my hand.
Were you born in Perth?
I was born in Perth, yes.
Yeah, whereabouts?
Yeah. Subiaco, St John of God's.
Yeah, right, yeah, okay.
Yeah, the 3 Farriss brothers were all born there, and... When we sort of got to the stage where we'd become the Farriss Brothers in Sydney, I had this idea, because Mum and Dad were moving back to Perth, that we should all just go and be musicians and live in Perth, because Johnny was so little he couldn't leave home, and he was our drummer. So, and I thought, it's like jumping off a cliff or jumping into the ocean. You're either sink or you swim. Yeah. So I said, look, I'll manage the band. I'll go over a couple of weeks at the head. Organised a bunch of gigs, and I did that and met up with an agent, and we were the Farriss Brothers from Sydney, in Perth, and we worked 5-6 nights a week and rehearsed all day every day.
Wow.
And until we felt ready to come back to Sydney, and the rest is sort of history.
Well, why did you guys go to Sydney in the first place from a young age? Was it your father's work or something?
Yeah, my father's work. He was he was the general manager of an insurance company, and
Right.
he was promoted to national manager.
Yeah, right. And you've got a sister, right? Is it Alison?
Yes, Alison. Yeah, actually, she lives pretty close to me now, which
Right.
is amazing after all this time.
Was she also musically inclined?
No, not even a little bit, really.
Wow.
No, she's just very content bringing up her two boys, and she loves to sing to music, but she's not really interested in playing it.
Yeah, right. So you moved to your Sydney, you with your brothers. Where did you meet Kirk? Because that's how it started, right? So you met Kirk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I met Kirk at Forest High.
Right.
And after we moved to Sydney, we were in science, I think it was, and I got told to sit next to this guy who had glasses on. He had a drawing of a guitar in his pencil case.
Yeah, right.
And I was a bit of a surfy in Perth.
Yeah.
But when I met Kirk, he had the guitar in his pencil case, and I was like, hey, I play guitar, He's like, oh, I love it, And he lived at Cottage Point, which back then was miles from anywhere because there wasn't even a sealed road. No electricity, no town water. They used to, run their house off a generator.
Amazing.
And they had a restaurant down there at Cottage Point called the Red Rock Tavern. And we used to alternate weekends. He'd spend a weekend up living with the Farrisses.
Yeah.
And I'd spend a weekend down there in the land of the Point.
And what year was this?
Brothers.
What year are we talking?
What's that?
What year are we talking?
That would have been 73. Yeah, from about 73. Yeah, it's a long time, eh?
Well, I was born 1974, so it's 48 years ago.
Wow. Yeah. Well, there you go.
Yeah. So you and Kirk hang out. You start playing together. He starts playing with your brothers. How did Michael and Gary Beers?
No. Sorry. Well, Kirk and I had this other band,
Right.
And meanwhile, because my brothers were too young to hang out with at the time, it was pretty cool. So they had their own band. Well, Andrew had his own band with Michael,
Right.
And Johnny played in another band altogether that just did clubs, and they did like covers, and and they did all kinds of things. And at the time, Johnny was the only one out of a lot of us that was getting paid.
Right.
We were the other bands that the rest of us guys were in we worked on original material and didn't play that many gigs. We mainly rehearsed and wrote music and that sort of thing. There wasn't a lot of for bands of our age and that sort of thing, there wasn't a lot of work for original bands, especially in Perth.
Yeah.
Everyone wanted covers, And so, and then I had this operation on my arm, and I was recuperating back home at my parents' place where Johnny and Andrew still lived with Mum and Dad. I'd moved out to Whale Beach with Kirk.
Yeah.
And the boys were playing, downstairs in the garage, and I was sitting up there. The band that Kirk and I were in had broken up, and it just sort of occurred to me, what the fuck, I should be playing with my brothers,
Yeah.
And they got this pimply little skinny singer, big guy that maybe, I don't know, he might have potential, he was very shy and really wasn't much of a singer. And Gary was the bass player. So I just came up with this idea that we form a band, and Mum and Dad were talking about moving back to Perth, and so we rehearsed, and we enjoyed playing together. The first song we ever played together was "I Shot the Sheriff" for a mate and of Kirk and I, and we backed him on a recording, and so we sort of thought we sounded pretty good, and we thought it was worth pursuing. And when Mum and Dad told us they were moving back to Perth, that's when I came up with the idea of a lot of us, and Kirk was the last one to commit. And we just left everything. Michael was ready to just leave. He dropped everything, and we all just moved to Perth and went with it. And
Right.
the whole worked.
So Michael and Kirk moved to Perth as well?
Yeah.
Wow.
And Gary, they all left their jobs, their homes, their parents, and everything, and had trust and faith in me that I made sure that they could eat. And I rented a house, and we all lived in it. I mean, we were pretty young, You know, it was, when I look back on it, it's like, I can't believe we did it.
Yeah. Well, I was just about to say the same thing. You know, because you would think that, you know, you're moving back because your family are moving back and your brothers, but for 3 other guys who, how long had you known each other at the time?
Well, Kirk and I a long time, but I didn't really know. Well, actually, the funny thing was Gary was in our year in the same school as Kirk and I.
Right.
But I didn't hang out with him because he wasn't very cool. And he even came. So,
can I ask you a question? Even at the height of your rock star stardom, was he cool then, or was he still not cool?
Well, it was kind of hard to shake that uncool thing, you know. No, I think he was always cool.
Yeah.
You know, I just didn't realise it.
Yeah, right. Okay. You got out of that one good. That's good. That's good.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, he always scored pretty gorgeous-looking women.
Oh, right. Okay.
So he must have been cool. You know?
He must have. Yeah, he must have been cool. So you all move over to Perth, right? Did you eventually move back to Sydney, or was INXS a band from Perth? Really, after that, when you know?
Well, the Farriss Brothers from Perth kind of after that.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine poor mum and dad? They lost all 3 sons at once. You know, they were like,
yeah.
As we drove off, across the Nullarbor on acid back to Sydney, you know, to become the Farriss Brothers, which became INXS. And that was the beginning of it all. And then I met Gary Morris, who was managing Midnight Oil.
Yeah.
Putting flyers under car windscreens at the Newport Hotel.
Yeah.
And there was Gary Morris doing the same thing for Midnight Oil.
Yeah.
And he said, I've heard a bit about you guys. And he said, how would you like a gig opening for, I think it was the Angels at the Antler. It was the Angels at the Antler.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, right, you know, let's and we got an encore. It was amazing.
What were you playing back then? Were you just doing covers, or was it a mixture of covers?
We were still doing original material, but we were doing covers as well.
Yeah.
So because we'd had to in Perth, if we didn't play covers in Perth, we would have got kicked out straight away. But,
yeah.
And that was kind of the problem in the end with Perth, was we wanted to play more originals. So we were playing a lot of our own material, and we were doing things like, you know, Hey Lord, Don't Ask Me Questions. Love is the Drug, and you know, all kinds of everything from the Tubes to you know, all kinds of stuff. We were really mixed bag of fruit.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you who were some of your early influences.
Probably for mine, you know, people like Curtis Mayfield. Had a lot of different influences. You know, Pink Floyd. I mean, I really loved the funky stuff. So you know, but then you know we would listen to Santana. You know, we're a great band, and we a lot of Australian bands used to. But this is back in the day. Kirk and I used to go and see a lot of Australian bands perform on the northern beaches. You know,
who was big back then when you guys were starting out?
Oh, in Australia?
Yeah,
bands like the Laddie Does, you know. And then when we started as INXS, Skyhooks were big, but before that was Sherbet, you know.
Yeah.
And, you know, Billy Thorpe and the Aztecs, and, it was Chain, you know. When I look back, you know, it was a really good music scene in Australia back then.
Yeah, right.
It really was. And then, but it became like amazing.
Yeah.
You know, really, when you look back at when we came back to Sydney, we would do 8-9 shows a week, you know. It was incredible.
At all the RSLs, pubs?
Yeah,
the whole combination of
pubs, RSLs, university shows. It was... You know, some bands like Mental as Anything, Midnight Oil, Flowers, which, you know, became Ice House, and, I could just go on and on and on.
Yeah.
And we'd all see each other in the different places we played, because you'd run into each other in Queensland or Brisbane or in Melbourne, where everyone stayed at Macy's on Choorat Road.
Yeah.
Oh, man, some of the nights we had there was just insane. But, you know, the Mental as Anything guys were were really great
Yeah.
guys and friends too. They were really arty, and we had a lot of time for the Divinals. You know, it's still probably my favourite Australian band of all time.
Right.
And we toured with Cold Chisel.
Yeah.
You know, that was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to ask you who your favourite band was, so you sort of answered it there. What about your favourite guitar hero? Like when you were growing up, who did you want to be?
Well, growing up was always Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah.
I mean, he just played stuff that like nobody else did. But I also really liked, you know, the early Nile Rodgers stuff that he was doing for, you know, Diana Ross and that sort of thing. And then, of course, well, I mean, my favourite guitar player of all time has to be, what's his face from Pink Floyd, you know, Dave Gilmour.
Yeah, right.
He's just mind-blowing, you know. For me, he's just like, he's so good I try to forget his name. And I'm doing a pretty good job of it.
Now, tell me about the process of writing songs. So you guys have now moved back to, to Sydney.
Kirk and I are the only ones actually in Sydney.
Sorry?
Kirk and I are the only ones living in Sydney.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. But Gary lives in LA.
Yeah.
Andrew lives up in the northern tablelands.
Yeah.
On a huge cattle station up there, Barraba. And my youngest brother Johnny, he lives up in the hinterland up behind Byron there.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And so back then, if you weren't really making that much money, were you hanging out a lot in an apartment, in a house? Because I'm really fascinated about the songwriting process back then. You know, how does typical INXS process work in terms of writing?
To start with, we were all writing pretty much together.
Yeah.
And sharing ideas and whatnot in a room, you know, and rehearsing stuff out and writing pretty much together. And then over the years, as things like after the first album, you know, I mean, Andrew had started becoming kind of the predominant songwriter about the time of the first album sort of thing, which was really the best of the Farriss Brothers.
Yeah.
And then, and Michael, of course, had to sing the lyrics, so he would write what he was going to get up there and sing.
Mm-hmm.
And he had always had an interest in poetry anyway.
Yeah.
And you know, it's really interesting, I think, when you listen to our really early stuff, you can hear how Michael's approach to melody progresses and matures over time. It's like it morphs into this butterfly, you know. It's quite amazing, really. But then it continued to our songwriting techniques. After working with various producers, you know, it started becoming a lot clearer that, you know, maybe we'd try just like Andrew and Michael going away and writing together and coming back.
Yeah.
And then we'd all add our pieces to it.
Yeah.
So we still sort of contributed to the songwriting in a sense that a lot of our parts we'd write. You know, sometimes Andrew would write different parts for different people as well, but often we'd come up with ideas and co-write stuff as well. So and it just kind of grew and matured, you know.
Right. And do you remember the first time you wrote a particular song, or what was the first sort of hit that you went, wow, that is going to be a hit, or wow, that is just fantastic?
Yeah, look, one of the last songs we all wrote together as a band. Yeah, I remember having a lot of input into that, and that was "Don't Change."
Right.
And it's to this day, I think it's, apart from "Never Tear Us Apart," it's probably our most covered song.
Yeah, right.
You know, it's so many people have recorded "Don't Change." It's incredible. You know, out here, Bruce Springsteen played it.
Wow.
Yeah, lots of people have played it. It's bizarre. Smashing Pumpkins did a version of it. You know, I saw my son. Like I took him to see Smashing Pumpkins, and then I'm sitting there because I don't know where James has gone. You know, and the next minute I see him floating across the mosh pit like this. You know? and they're playing one of our songs. I'm going, this is pretty weird.
That's surreal. That is surreal.
Yeah. Yeah. But so that I have very fond memories and a real connection with writing that. And then hearing some of the songs that Andrew and Michael got off and written, hearing them for the first time, going, "That's good. I like that.
Yeah,
and that's going to be great."
Yeah,
there are some real standout songs of that.
Yeah,
everything from "Mediate" to "Need You Tonight" to "What You Need" to "Suicide Blonde."
Yeah,
"Never Tear Us Apart." I could tell that had legs, and "Disappear." All hits.
Yeah, yeah. Well, look, I'm not going to ask you what your favourite song is, but I'm going to ask you this. Well, when you and I first met, we were in a mutual friend's home, and we were in a corner chatting. Someone thought it would be a really funny idea, and I'm sure you've had this before, to go to the jukebox and put an INXS song on. And they played "Need You Tonight," right? Now, you didn't even flinch, right? But as soon as that guitar bit, dan, 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 you just started playing. It was just in...
Yeah.
You just heard, and your face didn't move. So if you were at a barbecue and you had to play one INXS song to your friends at a barbie, what would that song be?
Oh, by myself or with the band?
No, by yourself, if you had to play.
Oh, gosh. Probably... you know what? For mine, one of my favourite songs to play on the guitar without any backing would probably be "Never Tear Us Apart," because the guitar part, my guitar, I play the only guitar in that song.
Yeah.
So that makes the guitar part pretty important.
Yeah.
And my part pretty important.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't attempt to sing.
Yeah.
I only do that here.
Yeah, right.
Where no one can see me.
In the studio. What about the song that you think represents the band the best? What INXS song represents the band?
Well, there you go. Now, see, that's a good question, because we had so many kind of sides to the thing. Like on the one hand, I'd have to say "Don't Change" was a really good, but that goes back to 1983. But then if you watch the Wembley concert or listen to our records. I only say the Wembley concert because it was filmed and recorded, so that's as a reference. That was just one of, I don't know, how many hundreds of stadium shows we did.
Yeah. And we'll talk about that. I've got a few questions about that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. But the Stairs, for mine, and the way it's, that starts with the long introduction, and then, and Hear That Sound is another great INXS song. I also think Original Sin, because that's got that funky guitar groove in it that shows the Nile Rodgers influence. It was a big influence on me, and I pushed that on the guys, to be honest. And then then there's stuff like "What You Need" and "Need You Tonight," and then the other side you've got the sort of the fantastic ballad of a song that we're constantly asked people want to use is "Never Tear Us Apart." It's just that's just it's just one of the greats, I guess. I've got to hand it to Andrew and Michael on that one.
Yeah. You see, you mentioned Nile Rodgers a few times. I think with musicians, people really love him and love working with him. I think to the general public, he's really underrated. A lot of people don't know about Nile Rodgers. He's one of those guys that if you're in the business, if you know about songwriting, if you know about producing albums, you'll know Nile Rodgers.
That's right.
But he's not really, that well known in terms of the general public. Tell me a little bit more about him.
Probably because of the era he comes from.
Yeah.
See, now, everybody today associates Mark Ronson with, Miley Cyrus or Bruno Mars or whatnot, and now Duran Duran.
Yes.
Which is kind of funny, but good on. Why not if you still can?
Yeah.
But Niall, so Niall he was a producer, and he used to play this guitar that's so distinct. I mean, most young people now, you'd say Daft Punk, and they go,
Yeah.
And that sort of thing. So, but you know what? It's half his luck, in a way for Niall, because he's managed to have this career that just when he probably thought it was all over.
Yeah.
Then when he worked with Madonna Michael Jackson, and then the next thing, you know, but like you don't realise it's him, you know.
Yeah.
That's why, as you say, the younger generation
Yeah.
wouldn't know who the guy was.
Yeah.
But to work within the studio, we just had the best time.
Yeah.
You know, he's just a fun dude, you know.
Yeah.
And we really got along really well.
And he's a cool-looking dude too, isn't he?
He is, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he played on stage with us, you know,
Right.
on a few shows.
Yeah.
He came up and played a few shows we did in New York. And,
Yeah.
and he'd just pop up here and there. There was we had a lot of musician friends
Yeah.
who just turn up at places, you know.
Yeah.
And it's really nice to have that sort of respect from your peers, you know, especially, you know, in bands that you sort of respected, you know, and guys like Tom Jones.
Yeah.
You know, and then Ray Charles, you know, and performing with Ray Charles was a great honour.
Oh wow, I didn't know that. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, he sung on a song called "Please You Got That Need," which we recorded when we were living in and recording on the island of Capri, in Italy, and Mark Hoppus, the producer, and Michael sort of took the song off and went to Los Angeles, and Sir Ray sung on it, and that led to us doing a video with him, and then Letterman. We did David Letterman quite a lot. We used to do that show, you know. I don't know how many times we played it, but quite frequently. And so we did Letterman live with Ray Charles, which was, you know, fully live, and that was great. You know, it's quite nice.
That would be amazing.
Good feather in the cap.
Yeah, absolutely. Now you mentioned, you know, being, you know, having great peers to work with, and also being recognised by your peers. Now, INXS was nominated for 3 Grammys. What was that experience like?
Pretty daunting. I mean, the last one that I recall was we were nominated for Best Band.
Yeah.
And I can't remember who the other nominees were except Aerosmith.
Right.
And they just had that the thing with Run DMC and
Yes.
Walk This Way.
Walk This Way, yeah.
And,
which was huge.
And we were riding high too, you know.
Yeah.
So and it was funny because at the MTV Awards earlier, I think, or it might have been the year before, we played. It was the year before or something. It was very close to it. We were doing the MTV Awards. You know, I got a bunch of them up there, American ones. The Space Guy, you know, which is pretty cool. Because this one year we sort of did the big sweep of the MTV Awards in the US, and the guys, Steve Tyler was coming and hanging out now. Trailer man, you know, he'd come and hang out with us, and it was really cool. You know, and he was a lovely guy, and so then at the Grammys, this the last one we were nominated for Best Band. I don't know why, but I was the only one that was able to go.
Yeah, right.
And there was this, funny I should say the name Tyler, but there's this famous Australian clothing designer called Richard Tyler.
Right.
He made suits and clothes for movie stars and rock stars for his whole life in Los Angeles, Hollywood.
Right.
And he made me this beautiful suit to wear on the red carpet. And I got there and they're like, you know, I wasn't with anyone. So they were like, here, you're with her. And I was like, oh, hi. I'm with her, you know. And so we walk in, you know, and we're sitting together. And my wife's at home going,
That's what I was about to ask you. Were you married then? Yeah, obviously you were.
yeah, of course, yeah.
You imagine she finds out through the red carpet that you've got some other girl. You don't even know what
I think her name's Dana. I don't know.
But how do you explain that to your wife? I don't know, love. I was just there. They just gave me this girl. I swear, I promise. I don't.
Look, gee, we used to have some interesting phone conversations, you know.
Yeah.
Like I'd be on tour and we'd be playing Montreux, you know, and hanging out because we toured with Queen.
Yeah, yeah.
And we did the Montreux Pop Festival.
Yeah.
And we were hanging out a lot with Queen.
Yeah.
And stories. But we were hanging out.
Can you tell us anything? Can you tell us anything?
Yeah. Oh, well, there was this one night where but after we did the performance, where Freddie invited us up to his suite at the the big hotel in the Montreux Grand.
Yeah.
Montreux is just a stunning place.
Yeah.
It's still one of my favourite places in the world, and I'd love to go live there, but I miss my family here too much. And so there's Michael and me and Johnny, my brother, and our tour manager in Freddie's room, and Freddie had his kind of guy, you know, and we were like partying, you know, and Freddie was like, well, I've just finished recording these songs. Tell me what you think. He had these huge fucking great speakers in this suite with a grand piano and stuff, you know, as you do.
As you do when you're Freddie Mercury.
Yeah, and a microphone, you know, in his hotel room, which is like, okay.
Yeah.
And he had Michael up there, and like they were both singing into this microphone to this music I'd never heard before, and then there's Johnny and I and our tour manager sort of sitting on the couch going, wow, this is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
You know, Freddie and Michael, like belting it out, you know, in Montreux.
Yeah.
But I remember the next day we had off there, and it was really, really beautiful. I'm sitting out there on my veranda in front of my room, you know, looking at Lake Geneva, and I'm like, oh, I'll give the wife a call. And I'm like, hey, hon. And I could hear the kids screaming in the background, and she'd be like, what is it? I'm just making dinner. I'm like, nothing. I was going to tell you how awesome it is here.
It's just funny, like...
Suddenly thought it was a bad idea.
Yeah. Like, you know, you can be a rock star to the whole world, but when you got to call your wife and the kids are screaming, that's just... I'm not...
That's it, you know. Yeah, then the pangs of guilt.
Yeah.
But, you know, 2017, I took her there, and we stayed in that suite, you know, and... where she just fell in love with it too, and I was said, "Look, this is what I was talking about."
Yeah,
all those years ago.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
So anyway, back at the Grammys, and the winner is, and they're opening the envelope, Aerosmith, and I was so relieved because otherwise I would have had to get up there.
Well, firstly, you would have had to pretend...
which I had nothing prepared for. More spotlight would have been on Dana or whatever her name is.
Yeah.
You know?
And you would have had to pretend to...
Like, thanks.
Yeah. How would you have approached it?
I knew I was going to thank Chris Thomas, the producer, because that man is a legend. You know, he's the most awesome producer we've ever had the privilege of working with.
Yeah. Well, you know, I like your story about Michael and Freddie.
And
Sorry?
And my mate Mark Opitz, so couldn't leave him out as well. We were lucky to work with great producers.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you about that, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Sure. I was going to... One of the questions I had for you was, I know you toured with Queen, and you kind of talked about it a little bit, but, you know, Michael was a very charismatic frontman. There was just no doubt that there was something about him. But I'd probably say that Freddie Mercury was probably one of the best frontmen in the world, right?
Yeah.
Would you agree? What are your
different.
thoughts on that? Yeah.
Yeah, it's really hard to compare anyone to Michael. Probably, I always think of Michael a bit more like in the same vein as cross between kind of Jim Morrison and Steve Tyler, in a way. But Freddie was just Freddie, you know, and he was really different. Yeah. And so he sort of, I'm not quite sure how to describe Freddie. Like, really, he's not what I would call your classic rock singer. I mean, Queen went through a period where they couldn't get arrested, as they'd say in the States.
Yeah.
You know, especially in America. They were just couldn't sell a record.
Yep.
No one was interested. It wasn't until Wayne's World that they took off again in America.
Yeah.
And people gave a shit, you know.
Yeah.
It was mainly Europe and the UK they'll be.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned before that you were recording in Capri. Now, if I'm correct, you recorded Full Moon, Dirty Heart in Capri. Is that right?
That's right. Yes. Yeah. And it was in the sort of latter part of autumn, going into winter, because we all went home for Christmas. We sort of had we had a classic Italian Christmas dinner.
Yeah.
There, but which was great because it was the weather was cool if not cold.
Yeah.
And the island was pretty much deserted.
Yeah, it would have been. Yeah.
So we had it all to ourselves and the locals, and it was a real true Italian experience. It was awesome, really awesome.
Well, my question is where, in your mind, was the best album recording experience out of all the albums that you've done?
Well, from one aspect, Capri was pretty good.
Yeah.
But really owning the studio here in Sydney and going home at night and being able to, like, be normal and then go into record and kind of, like, go through, because there was no pressure to get it done. And recording the first album with Mark Opitz at Rhinoceros Studios, which we ended up buying.
Yeah.
That was an insane experience because Mark was the first proper producer we'd ever worked with.
Yeah.
But then working with Chris Thomas at Rhinoceros, making Kick, that was because we rehearsed that record at the Opera House, Sydney Opera House. It was like, we'll just hire the Opera House and rehearse.
Yeah.
It's like, why not? The world's best parking spot, I tell you. And ballerinas running around.
Yeah.
Wow. And the whole thing was really, really fun and really great memory. So I have to say, recording Kick was a great, because it just had this vibe of like the record. We had a break in the middle of it as well.
Yeah.
Came back and Andrew and Michael had the last sort of 4 or 5, 6 songs, and pretty well written, and they sounded fantastic, and we just couldn't wait to record them. And then the album, it just was, and then we just worked our butts off.
Yeah.
After that.
Yeah.
It just was.
But am I right in saying that Kick at first was actually sort of trashed by the record company? They didn't like it at first?
In the States, yeah. Atlantic Records, as Chris Murphy tells the story anyway, was rejected by Doug Morris, who at the time was the head honcho. Now, the first time I went to New York City, I went and saw Prince with Doug Morris, Chris Murphy, and Michael Hutchence, and Reen Nally, the label manager. And that was in 1983. And, man, Prince was just so hot back then. He really was. I mean, he's always been really good.
Yeah, yeah.
The energy he had then was mind-blowing.
Yeah.
Anyway, and that was the most black people I'd ever seen in one spot.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I was like, wow. Radio City Music Hall, which we'd go on to play a few times. And, in fact, Nile Rodgers got up and played with us there one time.
Yeah.
But, so I got really sidetracked there. But...
No, that's okay. We're having a chat, mate. That's what this is about.
You know what? All the albums have their own special, aspect to recording.
Yeah.
Really, probably the one I enjoyed the least was the last one,
right?
Because it was in Vancouver, and Andrew and Michael had these new songs that they'd pretty much written a lot of the parts for, and there wasn't a great deal of license for myself to have a great deal of input on.
Creative
input. So from my point of view, I didn't enjoy that record as much. Mm-hmm. And also, it just wasn't, Fairbairn wasn't the same producer. Chris Thomas and I are great mates. We did 3 records with him. And after working with him, and same with Mark Opitz, I love working with those guys as producers.
Yeah.
I think they really got the band.
Yeah. Well, look, we're going to talk about that, so let's talk about that now. What is it about these two guys that you love working? What do they bring to a record that other people haven't, or that you like in particular?
Well, Chris Thomas first saw us. Mark Opitz saw us live for ages before he worked with us as well.
Yeah.
But in Australia. But similarly, Chris Thomas saw us at a show we were doing in Dallas, Texas, with the Pretenders, because he did all the Pretenders records, and we were doing this. I can't remember. It was something around the ballroom, I think, in Dallas, and Chris was there, and then he popped up and saw us in a few other places, but didn't tell us that he was there. And he saw us in Tokyo.
Yeah.
And funnily enough, there was a handful of producers going around for the Listen Like Thieves album as suggestions, and Chris Thomas came up as one of them because of all the great records he'd made, the Roxy Music, For Your Pleasure was my favourite. Chris Thomas is sitting there in the studio with us, and he says to everyone in the band, "What's your favourite record? What's your favourite record?" And when it got to me, I said, "Oh, For Your Pleasure by Roxy Music." And Chris went, "Oh, really? I produced that." I went, "Get the fuck out of here." I went home, and there was his name, like Chris Thomas, right across the record. Wow.
Yeah.
With Eno and all the boys. So he'd done the Pretenders stuff. So he was good friends with them and Chrissy Hine. Mm-hmm. And so, he saw us playing at the show there, and he really wanted to work with us, and he thought that our previous work didn't sound as good as we sounded live. So both he and Mark really wanted to try and capture the sound that we had live in the studio. And I think because they'd seen us live so often, they really understood who we were and the potential that we could be on record. And so, and particularly from my point of view as a guitar player, they understood me and got the best out of me, and I just loved them for it.
Yeah. When you had to... Well, when the record company said that they didn't like Kick, right? Yep. What didn't they like about it, and what happened after? What was the process of actually getting it done?
Well, we were pretty much kept in the dark about it. Like it's not like Chris came and said the record company don't like it.
Yeah.
Woe was us. We were already touring. We started. Chris had this great idea. It was a good idea. We sort of finished the Listen Like Thieves tour.
Yeah.
And promoting that record. That was the Queen tour of Europe and that sort of thing. So, but back in the States, we were much bigger. We'd already sort of broken America, but Europe we were still, working on. That's why we were touring with Queen. Mm-hmm. So we went back to the States, and Chris sort of thought, well, let's try and get this record promoted on college radio. See, the States is, a lot of people mightn't understand, but the States is very kind of like it's pigeonholed, or radio is like it's very pointed demographically, So you got your college radio, you got your AOR, you got your album orientation, which is out AOR. You got easy listening, you got pop. It just goes on and on and on. There's all these different genres of radio, and they just play that. And then including college radio, which is like alternative in a sense, but it's college alternative. Yeah. So we were being heavily promoted through college alternative radio, which is kind of the groovy way to go about it. So he had us doing colleges, which mightn't sound like much, but colleges in America, they're 20,000 seat arenas, much bigger than our arenas here. That's the colleges, So we were doing those, and meanwhile Chris was having this argument, I guess, with Doug Morris at Atlantic. But the fact that it started getting traction on radio and so quickly, I think just blew his argument out of the water. It just seemed to be going. It just went from strength to strength. And so when we heard that story, we were like, "Wow, what the fuck?" I'm glad we didn't hear it, because I don't know how we would have dealt with it.
Yeah. And so America was great for you a lot sooner than the UK was, which is kind of...
The UK was the last bastion, the last place. In fact, probably the first place internationally for us to be famous outside of Australia. Well, actually, we were more famous outside of Australia than we were in Australia, really. Yeah. But it was South America, Argentina, Brazil, Peru. So, all those Latin-speaking countries. And then France, the original Sin was a big hit in France, and Italy and Spain. Yeah. But the UK was always last. They had the old penal collar attitude towards us guys, anti-Indians, this sort of stuff. And so that was the real thing about, you know, selling out Wembley and selling it out 3 weeks before we even got to the UK.
Yeah.
You know, we were on tour in Europe when we heard that we'd sold out Wembley Stadium, and we were like, that's cool, you know.
Yeah.
So we went in there with all this confidence, and we'd sold it out.
Yeah.
And you know, the fact that the crowd was so animated and it was like, well, what were you guys waiting for?
Yeah, that's right.
You know, so it was a real like that moment.
Yeah,
and that made it really special.
And it's ironic that you know that Wembley was probably the biggest concert you did, right? And it took the UK a while.
Well, it was, yeah, exactly. Well, yes and no. It wasn't the biggest concert we did, but it was certainly the biggest concert we did in the UK.
Right.
Because we were doing festivals and
You did Rock in Rio?
all over. Yeah, we did Rock in Rio 3 or 4 times.
Rock in Rio is like 300,000, isn't it? How many people?
Yeah, it was crazy.
Yeah,
Rock in Rio, and the audience is there go nuts. And it's particularly for us in Argentina because we'd been touring there since we first started touring America.
Yeah.
So we had our first big hit outside Australia in Argentina.
You're right.
Yeah, and so you know that was the other band, and this is interesting. Chris Murphy had this thing because Queen, in all the times that they weren't popular anywhere else in the world, were big in South America. So Chris is like, well, you guys are going to tour in South America a lot because this band Queen, they've been surviving through touring in South America. And you know what? The South American fans never forget.
Yeah.
They're still all over our stuff, our website, all that sort of stuff. It's amazing that we could still go back to Argentina, you know, next month and play, and they just turn up and, you know, sell out arenas and stuff. It'd be amazing.
Wow. It's a great place, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
I hope you enjoyed part 1 of my discussion with Tim Farriss from INXS. In part 2, Tim discusses the infamous Wembley Arena Stadium show, his best ever gigs, including what it was like getting off stage and finding Keith Richards from the Rolling Stones in your dressing room. The discussion then turns to the day Michael Hutchence died and the immediate aftermath, finding his replacement, the passing of his long-term manager Chris Murphy, and where to from here from INXS and Tim, and his love affair with Italy. Enjoy.